And we're live. For the audience that does not know you, please introduce yourself.
All right. Well, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. My name is Jordan Petrovich. I am 39 years old. I was born and raised in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Um, I grew up in a very big family. Uh, on my mom's side of the family, I had 45 first cousins. It was a big religious family. So I tell people growing up, I didn't really have a lot of friends. I just had family. We all lived close to each other. Even on the other side of the family, there was still a handful of cousins as well. So it was a big family. We were, pretty poor, but we just relied on each other and had a good time. So I'd say my childhood was great. It was a good time growing up, getting to just kind of go wild in the woods a little bit. But yeah, I grew up playing a lot of sports. That was like my passion. I was huge into sports, watching them, playing them. Did about everything you could possibly do. Um, Wrestling was my main sport, but I loved football and baseball and a little soccer now and then, or water polo, or just anything I could do um, for competing. I love to compete. So that was what drove me at a young age. That's what got me into working out, being in shape. And then growing up, my dad had joined the Navy when he was very young, and I can't remember his exact job, but he like fueled up the fighter jets on an aircraft carrier. And he did that for 4 years and got out. But growing up, he would always tell me stories about Navy SEALs. So the thing I would love to do is run around the woods and pretend to be a Navy SEAL, whether it's swim in the water or jump in the snow and just do crazy things. So that was my dream my entire childhood. I'm going to finish high school and I'm going to join the military. I'm going to be a SEAL. And then my senior year playing football, I tore my MCL in my left leg pretty bad. And I was in a straight leg cast for 6 weeks. And I thought, I don't want to join the SEALs with an injury. So I'll give myself some time to heal up. And then that's when life took over. So before I knew it, I was married and I had a full-time job. And I was kind of living that life for a while. I worked for a medical company, sold medical equipment. It was a fun job at the time, just being like a 18-year-old kid. And it was kind of, I was living at home. Before I got the job, I was living at home. And my parents were pretty much like, if you're going to live in the house, you need to do something. And so through a friend of a friend, that's how they got me into that job. And I don't even know how I got hired to this day, because I showed up in shorts and flip-flops and just didn't care about anything. And after the interview process, they said they let me know after a few days. And I thought, okay, well, never see them again. And I got a call the very next day saying, you got the job. So I started in the warehouse doing shipping, receiving type stuff, kind of worked up to a warehouse manager type of position. And I was just being competitive. I wanted to keep growing. And I thought at that time, maybe that's what my life was going to be. So I moved up into the office, into like a sales manager position. But the more I started talking to the people at the company, I realized a lot of them had been working there for 20 years and had very little future. And I still remember to this day, I was sitting in the cubicle and going through my stuff. And I thought, I can't do this anymore. And I went home. And at the time, I don't know if they still do them anymore, but at the time they were running a lot of Navy SEAL commercials. And it really brought back everything that I had, the passions that I had. And I talked to my wife at the time, and she seemed to be on board, even though she probably had no idea what she was getting into. So I had been working out pretty consistently before then. Just that's I always kept up a workout routine, but it was more bodybuilding, big show off muscles. So I decided to change up my whole routine. I gave myself about 6 months of hardcore calisthenics. Um, it was funny. I was in good shape, but I could probably only do 2 pull-ups because, like I said, I was just benching and squatting maybe. So started running a lot of calisthenics, got myself in really good shape. And then I went and saw a recruiter, and it was a very fast-paced process. I sat down, told him that I had a dream of being a SEAL. He said, all right, well, you have to pass the PST, or the physical screening test. And I didn't know what that was. So he kind of gave me a brief rundown. He said, we actually have one tomorrow if you wanted to show up. I said, okay. So I showed up, and I passed on my first try, but barely. Part of the PST, the first part is a swim. You have to do a 500-yard swim, but you have to use the combat side stroke. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but it's a very different type of stroke, especially if you've never practiced it. So they basically taught me there on the pool deck right before the test, and I passed with maybe like 10 seconds to go, and I was gassed. So for the rest of the tests, I barely passed, you push-ups, sit-ups, and pull-ups, and a run after that. But I got a little down. There was another guy there who he had already passed the PST, and he was waiting to go to boot camp. And so he would just take the PST once a week or whatever it was. And I remember on the run, he lapped me. And he was a really fast runner, but I started the bad mindset of comparing myself to others. And so I thought, well, if this guy's lapping me and crushing everything, how am I going to make it? But it was a dream, so I just continued on. I went back to my work and said, basically, I'm quitting, I'm joining the Navy. I went and told my family, and almost everybody in my family said, why are you doing this? The chances of you making it are, little to none. And then you're going to be stuck in the Navy for 4 years, and, you're married, so what are you going to do? And I try to zone it out as much as I can. And, this is a dream. I'm going to go for it 100%. I don't care if I fall flat on my face. I'm going for it. So I was older. I was 26 years old when I joined the Navy, which is a little unusual, especially for anybody going into SEAL training. And that started one of the most difficult times of my life, was going to boot camp as a 26-year-old. I was there with a lot of young, 17, 18, 19-year-old guys, a lot of immaturity. So dealing with that and trying to just keep my expectations how I wanted them, stay optimistic. But it was also good. I made some really good friends. I was able to actually mentor a couple guys while I was in there. One guy in particular, he ended up being one of my best friends going through, and he was getting in trouble every day. He had a problem with authority. So I kind of had to take him under my wing and just tell him to keep his mouth shut and do what he's told, because we all wanted to be SEALs at that point. Back up real quick, at the time, they had a thing called 800 divisions, which meant if you wanted to be in special forces, you were kind of put into a special boot camp division with anybody else that wanted to be in special forces. So the whole boot camp was guys, for the most part, that wanted to be SEALs or divers or air rescue. So everybody had a high drive to get through. So that was good to be around that, because had I been around maybe regular Navy people, I think it would have been even tougher, especially at an older age. But get through that, and they also had a new program at the time. It was the prep school. So after you graduated boot camp, you would go across the street to the other Navy base, and where they had all the A schools for most of the regular military jobs. And you would basically just work out every day. And it was kind of the dream. You do 3 evolutions a day, usually 2 workouts in 1 classroom. There's running and swimming and weightlifting, and it was a really nice program. The coaches there were almost all civilian coaches, and most of them had their college degrees, or they were semi-pro athletes in whatever field it was in. So you had running coaches who were professional runners, and weightlifting coaches who knew it hands down, and swimming coaches. So it was some very high level training. We'd sit through classrooms on nutrition, mental toughness, a lot of things that I'll get to later, or I ended up actually teaching at that school for a little bit. But going through the time, I didn't really understand all the benefits. I just need to work out every day and I'll be good. But that was supposed to be 2 months long, and we were going to go to Coronado to start SEAL training in the winter. And the class before us had a record number of SIPE cases. And I'm sure you've heard of SIPE. It stands for stress-induced pulmonary edema. And if you're really cold and you work out really hard, you start to cough up blood. And so that class before us had like 26 cases of it. So they decided to wait a class. So I spent an extra 2 months at the prep school, which is probably a blessing in disguise, just getting more training. And then we went out to Coronado, I think it was around March. And then once you get there, you have, I saw your other interview, the guy said he keeps changing the name. There was PTRR and then BO, or basic orientation. But it's right before you start SEAL training, and it's kind of where they get you prepped for what you're going to experience. And you're waiting for everybody to class up and get there on time. And once you got through that, we start our SEAL training. And you want me to explain the process of that? Okay.
Yep.
So, yeah, it's broken into 3 phases to start, and the first one I'd say they call the kick in the nuts, where that's where they try to weed out as many people as possible. So you're getting up super early, you're doing your physical evolutions, you have your timed 4-mile run that you have to pass every week, you have your 2-mile ocean swim you have to pass every week, and an obstacle course. Those are the timed evolutions. And then on top of that, you're doing surf passage, you're doing surf torture, where you just lay in the water for long periods of time until you get hypothermic. And as soon as you get hypothermic, they'll plug you out a little bit, they'll warm you up, and then they'll put you right back in the water. So fun times, but it's just very grueling. And starting day one, you would see guys start quitting, and it was interesting to me, especially within the first week. I would wonder why guys would quit right away, especially if they went through that whole process to even get to that. It didn't make sense to me. It was difficult, but I thought my mindset going through was they're going to have to drag me off the ground. I'd rather die than quit. My only concern, I guess, was an injury, a major injury, because anything major, they can kick you out of the program and you have to wait 2 years to come back in. So I did my best to, take care of my body. But that's first phase. And towards the end of first phase, you have Hell Week. And it's 5.5 days of just torture. We started off, it's called Breakout. So you go into this room and everybody's there, and you got your Gatorades and your pizza and whatever you need to fuel up, and you don't know what time it's going to start. Anywhere from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. that day. And then they come busting in with machine guns with blanks in them and smoke grenades, and they try to create as much chaos as possible. And you have one instructor yelling at you to run this way, and another one yelling at you to run this way, and one saying, you should be doing push-ups right now, and another one saying, why are you doing push-ups? You should be doing flutter kicks. And the whole point is to create a sense of war, because war is extremely chaotic, and they want to see who can handle that. And then we went right into what they call base tour. So everything in Hell Week, you carry a boat on your head. They call them the IBS, inflatable boat small. And you have your boat crew of 7 men. It's usually 6 enlisted guys and 1 officer, but depending on how many officers are in the class. And sometimes you have foreign officers, which is a whole nother story we can talk about. But you carry the boat on your head everywhere you go. So starting base tour, you run about 2 marathons worth of running with the boat on your head, and they do races, and you stop to eat a little bit and get right back into it. So by the end of Hell Week, I had a nice bald spot on top of my head. On, I think, you get 2 2-hour naps as a mandatory thing. I don't know if it's on Wednesday and Thursday or Thursday and Friday, I can't remember. But the first nap, I remember taking the 2-hour nap, and waking up after that was one of the worst experiences of my life, because your body is so stiff and everything hurts. So the second time I decided to not take the nap. I'd rather just stay up, knowing, I only had, a day or a day and a half to go. And after you finish Hell Week, it's an amazing feeling. And then you have what you call Walk Week, and you still do some training, but you're kind of walking or shuffling everywhere you go. It's supposed to last all week, but in my experience, it lasted about 2 days before the instructors were right back, yelling at you and getting you going again. My experience with that is, after I finished Hell Week, we did a med check, and I don't know how it happened necessarily, but the doctor thought he heard not necessarily a heart murmur, but something wrong with my heart. And I was confused, because I said, I feel great. I just finished Hell Week. I don't really know what you're talking about. But he was concerned, and because the doctor has so much power there, which is why a lot of guys will refuse to go to medical. But the doctor said, you're not allowed to go into the next phase of training, which was diving, because he thought maybe with a heart condition that something bad could happen. So they put me in what they call rollback land, and it's kind of like this limbo area where guys are hurt, trying to recover. For me, I wasn't hurt, but they gave me they call it a no workout chit. So because they didn't know what was wrong with me, I wasn't allowed to work out, and I got a little fat during that time, because there's just really nothing to do, and I had to wait for all of these doctor's appointments at the Balboa Hospital. They had to do an EKG, and they had to do CT scan and different scans all through my body. And long story short, basically, when your veins go back towards your heart, they get smaller and smaller. And I had one vein that didn't get as small as it should. And so their concern was, if I'm diving, when you go down at depth and diving, the oxygen molecules get smaller and smaller, and one of those could pass through that and then go up into my brain and cause a stroke. They said the chance was 1 in a billion, but they had a whole meeting to see if I would be allowed to continue or not. And at the time, they were saying it wasn't looking good, and I thought my whole Navy career was about to be over. So I was depressed. I got fat. It was just not good. But basically, after much deliberation, they came back and they said, okay, since it's such a low risk, as long as you sign this waiver saying you're aware of everything, we'll let you do it. I said, okay. And they said, okay, well, you're going to class up in a week. And I hadn't been working out or doing anything, so I had to kick it in high gear. I did a practice 4-mile run, and I failed it miserably. But kept training, and I classed up for the next class. So I started with 288, Bud's class 288. I got rolled into 289 and went through second phase with them. Second phase is all diving. You learn scuba diving. It's a very old school style. The regulators, there's 2 hoses that come out. It's not what you would use today if you went scuba diving. And the reason they do that is because the instructors can tie knots in the hoses. And the big test, the second phase, is called pool comp. You start crawling at the bottom of the pool, and an instructor will come down, he'll punch you, kick you, rip your mask off, rip your hose out, and you have to follow these very specific set of procedures. So it's not just can you handle it? It's you have to be able to think under pressure, and everything has to be perfect. So they're watching you. There's a tank underneath, where there's people watching you. You have an instructor on top of you, and then you have other instructors watching you as well. And the test lasts 20 minutes, and it gets progressively harder and harder. So they'll do that a couple times to simulate a surf hit. They'll roll you around, spin you around, get you disoriented, and then they'll start taking it out and then start tying your hose in knots. And you're supposed to work on it for at least 10 seconds without taking it off, and they're timing you. And if you can't get it done in 10 seconds, then you have to take your tanks off, put them in front of you, and then work on the knot for another 10 seconds at least. And then the final procedure, they call it, is the whammy knot, where it's impossible to get out, or at least in the time frame that they're giving you. And that's kind of when you know the test is over, and you hope it is, because there's been times where guys thought they had the whammy knot and then requested to go up to the end, and they failed, maybe at 19 minutes. So you have to be extra sure that's what you're getting, and then you request to go up. They'll punch you in the gut again to make sure you don't have any air in your stomach, and then you'll come up. Like anything in buds, you get 3 chances to pass any timed evolution or graded evolution. And my first time doing pool comp, I failed, and I kind of blame it on the instructors personally. You have a whole class beforehand, and they say, if you have a knot, use your man hands. Don't just try to pretend to work on it and do this. So the very first knot I got, I'm back there, and I pulled really hard, and I just ripped the hoses right off the regulator. And I remember just looking at it, not knowing what to do, and they pulled me up and said, "You failed." And I said, "Okay." So I passed the second time, which I was grateful, because there was guys that if you failed twice, then you had to wait the whole weekend and then do it the next week. And so there was guys, the one I was talking about, I was really good friends with, he was stressing all weekend. And then you get into the Dregger, and that's a closed loop system. And to me, that was a lot of fun. It was interesting to me too, because there's a lot of guys, SEALs now, but even guys that are going through training then, that really didn't like diving. And that didn't make sense to me, because you're trying to be a Navy SEAL, and that's part of the process. But the Draeger is a closed loop system. You have a pure oxygen bottle, and then everything's on your chest, and you have a canister that's filled with a chemical. There's different ones, but the one we use is called Sodazorb. And what would happen is you breathe in this pure oxygen, and when you breathe out, it goes through this chemical system, and it scrubs all the carbon dioxide out, and then you're rebreathing the same pure oxygen. And then once that uses up, you add a little bit more from the oxygen bottle, and you can last about 2 hours on that. The purpose of that is there's no bubbles. So if you're being stealthy anywhere, there's no bubbles coming up. It's very quiet. There's no, basically big moving parts. That was a lot of fun, learning how to dive. You learn offset navigation, because it's not a matter of just, I'm going to swim 300 yards this way, because you have currents and you have obstacles. So you have to learn math, and as far as, okay, if I need to go this direction, I actually need to swim this direction, because the current's going to push me over. And if you time it right, you should land at your destination. So it was fun to learn that. That was second phase. Third phase is land navigation and moving and shooting. And you do a lot of it out on the island, they call it. But before you go to the island, you do land navigation in the mountains. So you have some classes on it, and then you have some practice days, and then a test day. And I had another incident. I should actually find the news article, because they came out with one about me. During land nav, I became sick on the practice day, and I was throwing up, and the doctor gave me Sudafed, and I didn't know too much at the time, but Sudafed really dries you out, dehydrates you. And when we were doing land nav, it was like 100 degrees out there in the mountain desert area. So it was already, guys were already getting dehydrated. Also, my radio wasn't working. And because you're supposed to check in every now and then, because, guys go off to the four winds and are miles and miles away, so the instructors can't sit there and watch everybody. So you're supposed to check in, let them know you're good. And when I came back to tell them my radio wasn't working, they tinkered with it a little bit and they said, "Oh, you're good now." So the next day I went out for the actual test day, and I wasn't feeling well. I had thrown up a couple times and tried to check in, couldn't check in. And I got kind of stuck on the side of this mountain, and I had thrown up so much that every muscle on my body was cramping hardcore, and I couldn't move. And I couldn't radio anybody. I would try to yell as much as I could, but there was nobody probably within miles of me. I almost got bit by a rattlesnake a couple times. It's a really dangerous situation. Eventually, they had to send out a rescue helicopter for me, and it was embarrassing at the time. They called the local fire department in the area. They sent out a rescue helicopter. I had my strobe light. I did everything that they taught me to do, as far as keeping up your strobe light so that the helicopter can see it. And they pulled me out of there. Went to the hospital. I had rhabdo. I'm not sure if you've heard that. Rhabdomyolysis, kind of where you start peeing blood and your body's breaking down. So I spent the night in the hospital, recovered from that, and then because that was the test day, I failed the test, and I went back and had a meeting with the instructors, and they were trying to decide my fate because one, I had failed the test, and two, according to them, I made them look bad by having to have them call, the local fire department to come and rescue me. And they also believed I was lying because part of that land nav is you have to carry, I don't know how many gallons of water, but you're supposed to carry water with you everywhere. And the common thing that guys would do is as soon as they get away from the instructors, they dump out half their water so they didn't have to carry it. And they claimed that's what I did, and that's why I got dehydrated. I didn't dump out any water, although I threw up pretty much all of it. But after some deliberation there, they decided to allow me to stay in the course, but they rolled me back to the next class. So started with 288, got rolled to 289, and then I was in 290. I redid the test, I passed it just fine. Went to the island, learned some, you do some shooting. It's more basic shooting. You learn demolition, which was a lot of fun, and all different types of demolition. And that's where they do the CS gas. And it's a riot control gas that, in my experience, makes you feel like you're dying. Your breaths get shorter and shorter and shorter, but they want you to experience what it's like in case you ever get in that situation. After that, you kind of graduate buds and you technically become a SEAL, but then you go straight into more training. It's called SQT, or SEAL qualification training, and that's like another 28 weeks long, and you do more advanced diving. That's where you go to free fall school. You go up to Kodiak, Alaska to learn survival training. You go into the desert to learn more land warfare. And then once you get through all of that, you kind of pick what coast you want to go to. I picked the East Coast. I was sent to SEAL Team 2, and that's kind of where my journey began.
So, and I asked William Branham the same question. Well, actually, number one, did you know Will at all?
No.
Did you know Steven at all? He's the other SEAL that I interviewed.
No, I didn't know them. And what I tell a lot of people is, there's not a lot of SEALs, but you have the East Coast and West Coast, and you don't really interact with each other. Because the West Coast deploys to the Middle East and, like the Philippine Islands type of area, and the East Coast will do Africa, South America, and Europe. So you don't really interact much as far as how you see each other. Even the teams are all on a different cycle. So on the East Coast, you have 2, 4, 8, and 10. And while one team is deployed, the other one is starting their training process, and the other one's more in the further end of the training process, I guess. So it's Yeah, unless you're at the same team, it's hard to know the other SEALs unless you have some personal interactions with them.
Right. Right. Well, one of the many questions that I asked both of them was, what types of jobs did you guys exactly do in the SEALs? Like, what would an average day of work look like for you, or some of your operations?
Yeah. So real quick, the SEAL teams are on a 2-year cycle. So it's the first 6 months is professional development, where you learn, a personal skill. The second 6 months is unit level training. So you're going out with your platoon and doing some land warfare training. The 6 months after that is SQT, or not SQT, or SIT, Squadron Integration Training. You might have changed the name on that, but that's more full mission profile, where you're working with Army and Marines and how all the different operating systems, and then you deploy for 6 months. So that's the basic 2-year cycle, and then it just keeps continuing as long as you want to stay in the teams. So when I first got there, as a new guy, we had a wish list, and I put in for sniper, and I got it. So I went to sniper school right away, and I was very happy about that. That was a lot of fun. And we could talk about that if you want, but that was my main job. The average day it kind of depended on what we were doing. So if let's say land warfare training was in Arkansas, so we would get everything ready, load up all our gear, fly or drive to Arkansas for a month, do training every, Monday through Friday, sometimes in the weekends, and then come back. And when you came back, you might have a week or two that's off, but you go into the team, do your workout, maybe do some paperwork, whatever it may be, and then get ready for the next training cycle. So every day was a little bit different. It wasn't like a typical day, I guess you'd say. But you were gone about 90% of the time. You were just always gone doing training or some admin thing at the team, because there's a lot of team gear that you have to take care of, get everything prepped and ready. Like the boats and motors that we would use, everything's got to be pristine, and not only pristine, but you have to know how to work on it. So even if you weren't training on the boats, you'd spend a whole week learning how to break down the motors, how to fix them on the fly, how to repair the boats on the fly. So everything was just constantly moving. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you did talk a little bit before. You briefly mentioned about your sniper work. So what was that like, and what types of operations would that entail?
Sniper school was 3 months long. It was in Indiana, and it was a blast. You learn how to, the three basic weapon systems you'd use are the 7.62. We had a SCAR. It was a modified version for sniper. We had the 300 Win Mag, and you had the 50 caliber sniper rifle. Those are the ones we would get tested on. You'd sit through hours and hours of classroom on ballistics and how bullets work and how the wind affects it and the different types of cartridges. And you learn all that, and then you go out to the range and you practice and you practice and you practice nonstop. And then you learn how to stalk. And stalking was a lot of fun, and learning how to camouflage. And then you go into urban settings, how to set up a sniper hide in a building and makes yourself pretty much invisible, and how to shoot at angles, how to shoot out of helicopters, because everything affects your shot. And if you're going to be a sniper, you're expected to hit your target pretty much first time. So it's not like a machine gun where you can just spray and pray and hope you hit something. You have to really know what you're doing. You have to know a lot of math. You have to learn weather. But I would say the main job, part of that too, is you learn a lot of photography, because I would say when you're going out on real missions, one of the biggest jobs of an actual sniper is photography. So if we had a compound that we knew, let's say we knew there was a bad guy there, but we needed more intel, they'd send out the sniper team, We would sneak in, find a good hide site, maybe 1,000 yards away or wherever it may be, and just observe the village. Take as many pictures as we can. We have to send those pictures back to the intel shop so they can confirm, yes, this is the bad guy. We could see if there's other bad guys there that we didn't know, or most of the time these guys would be living with their families. So, okay, how many kids are there? How many women are there? How many vehicles? What's their daily pattern of life? Are they coming and going every day, or are they staying there for a week? I would say that's the main job. And then even then, I wouldn't say snipers do a lot of sniping. It's more overwatch, they call it, where, okay, we've watched them for days or a week or whatever it may be, and we got the go ahead to do it. And then they're going to send in the rest of the squad to go hit the target, and you're going to stay up in your position and do overwatch. And if a guy, and you're there for communication. If you see a guy running away, you can give him directions. If you need to take the shot, you can always take the shot. But that's like the daily, not the daily, but it's like the basic job of a sniper for a SEAL.
Were there any specific traits that you had while both as a sniper and in your general career as a SEAL that you believe attributed to like most of your success?
There's a few. I mean, growing up, I grew up, my dad instilled the hard work ethic. So I was used to grueling work, and then going through wrestling. I think it's a hard sport. So learning that helped me get through SEAL training, where just because I'm inconvenienced by something or something's hard, I'm not going to just quit right away. I know I'm going to continue going. For sniper school, patience is a big key to that, because a lot of it's just sitting and waiting. So being patient and a lot of technical savvy. Like I said, you need to know a lot of math. You need to learn how to be a really good photographer. You need to know the radios, because you have to send the data over radios. It's all encrypted. So those are the basic skills with that. And I think those are the biggest ones that helped me.
You said you did wrestling before. I myself used to do wrestling, and you mentioned how helped you a lot. How far exactly did you get in wrestling, at least in your career in high school?
I started in 7th grade. Coach came up to me one day and just said, "You look like a wrestler." So I started, and I loved it right away. And I loved the competition, especially the one-on-one aspect of it, because I love team sports, but sometimes you can lose because somebody else did something stupid. So I loved that you were on a wrestling team, but also it was a one-on-one match. And I did that all through high school, and I was looking into doing it in college, but I became complacent towards the end of my senior year. I really stopped caring about a lot of things. I just wasn't intentional with my life. So I was ranked in state my senior year, and then I pretty much lost on purpose in the regional matches, because I just thought, I don't want to continue doing this. And I remember regretting it the second I lost. So that taught me a lesson, that I was feeling down on myself, and instead of just setting my goals that this is what I wanted and it's not going to last forever, to keep going. And I think that also helped me through SEAL training, instead of having, because in SEAL training, you're going to have some down moments. You're going to have some really shitty days. You're going to feel like quitting. If people say they didn't, think about quitting, they're probably a liar, because you go through some of the hardest times you'll ever experience, and you have to have the mindset that it's not going to last forever. It's going to end one day. So did that with wrestling. I coached for a little bit, and I did some freestyle, and that was fun. But that was pretty much the extent that I got to with that.
So one consistent theme or thing I noticed in some of your stories is that there's a few different down points, right? Where either you're feeling down or you get really high up, like you go to Mount Everest and then the mountain seems to just slide right underneath you, right? Like get injured or you lose intentionally and you regret it. How exactly did you learn to climb up that mountain again? Was there anything you told yourself, anything you did that caused you to do that or helped you?
Yeah, I I developed a mindset, um, and some of it was just through personal experience. Some of it's through reading people that I look up to or talking to people that I look up to. But failure to me is the best learning lesson. And once you shift your mindset, or at least for me personally, once I shifted my mindset, that failure was a good thing because it is the most information rich experience that you can go through. If you succeeded at everything, you would only know that one way on how to do things. But if you failed 99 times, you would have a vast amount of knowledge to work with going forward, so that whatever situation came up next, you could say, I've already done this, this, and this. I know this doesn't work, so let me continue to try this. And just looking at it like it was a good thing. Like I expected to fail, and I looked forward to failing because I knew that I was going to learn, and I love learning.
What and this is related to the part about failure, and maybe it is the same answer, but what is the biggest lesson that you learned from both being a SEAL and your career and Hell Week throughout everything?
The biggest lesson I learned is that myself, but people in general, are way more capable than what you think you are. Um, when your brain is a survival mechanism, it's going to tell you to stop long before you actually need to stop. And that's the biggest lesson I learned, because buds will continue to break you down and push you further than you've ever thought possible, to the point where you literally can't go anymore. And then you realize that your limits, you thought they were here, but they're here. And then once you have that, shifting down, you push that boundary again, and then you can continue to push that boundary, and just taking that into anything else in life, whether it be school, business, anything that I've done that I think maybe I've reached my limit, or other people are telling me you've reached your limits. I know that there's always more, always.
When it comes to people that struggle to find where to start, and this is another question that I've asked Will and Steven, but when it comes to people that are struggling to find where to start, what would you say to them? Like in life, or working out?
So I would say the first step is to have a plan. Um, I saw something the other day that was really stood out to me. It's like, if I ask you what 3 plus 4 is, you could tell me right away. That's easy. But if I say, what's 4,932 divided by 17, if you're really good at math, you might be able to figure out. But I would say, how else can you do that? Well, if you got a pen and paper and wrote it down, you could probably figure it out. If you look at life is way more complicated than a math problem. You have your emotions and your feelings and your job and your school and parents and siblings and relationships, and everybody just tries to figure it out in their head. And it really doesn't work like that. Just write it down. Write down your plans and goals. And it's also not a matter of just writing down your goals. So I think it's good to have short-term and long-term goals. But I knew a lot of guys that had the same goal as me to be a SEAL, and they failed. So it's not just having the goal, it's what preparation or work are you going to do to get to that point. And it's reevaluating yourself every day. So it doesn't have to be SEAL training, it could be school, it could be work. Evaluating yourself every day, and be completely honest. How did I do? Where did I mess up? What can I do better on? What did I do well at? if I don't know something, where can I get the answer? And that's something that we did in SEAL training constantly. We would mission plan and mission plan, then we go out and do it, and we come back and they call it a hot wash. And we'd sit there and just everyone's completely honest with each other. What went wrong? What went right? What can we do better? Like, let's call each other out, not in a bad way, but like, I saw you did this. I think you can do this better. And removing your ego and saying, okay, you're right. I can do that better. So I think the first step, have a plan. The saying in the SEAL teams is plan your dive and dive your plan.
Is there any type of self-talk that you ever do with yourself, like when you're feeling down, or is there anything you say to yourself, like a go-to?
I don't really have a go-to specifically, but like I mentioned before, I actually taught at the prep school before I got out of the military. And so I was able to teach mental toughness classes, and I did a lot of research on my own. And the four major things that they would teach is arousal control, which is like breath work, learning how to regulate your breath and your emotions, goal setting, self-talk, and I'm blanking on the last one right now. But when it came to self-talk, like you said, the science would talk about just say something positive, have an affirmation that works with you. It could be a song, it could be a quote, it could be a family saying, a Bible verse, whatever it is that motivates you, use that and have it to be positive. So for me, it was just, I'm not going to quit. They're going to have to, peel me off the ground, and I'm just going to keep going. I got this. I know I can go further than I have before. The study that I would teach the guys that I was working with is real quick. They did a study with cyclists, and they had top level cyclists, and they split them into two groups, and they had everybody do an endurance test. So you get on the bike and you had to maintain a speed for as long as you can. And they measured everybody, and they all got around the same time because they were all professionals, at high level. One group, they said, go home for 2 weeks, train, we're going to do it again. The other group, they taught them self-talk. And the only thing they taught them was, when it gets really hard, just say, it's not that hard, I can go a little more. It's not that hard, I can go a little more. They brought them all back, redid the test, and the group that they did the self-talk with was able to go about 17% further than before, and the other group maintained whatever they kept. And it was just through positive affirmations.
So if there was anything that you would have in terms of habits, right, relating to the psychology of mental toughness, like, is there, and also Navy SEALs, is there anything that you do in a day that you think you would attribute to, or in your workouts that you would attribute to being a Navy SEAL?
Yes, I would say do the hard thing. Like, and by that I mean, a lot of people don't have much adversity in their life, and it's proven that adversity can either make or break somebody. And I would see sometimes some of the toughest guys were the ones that grew up really poor, or they didn't have a father, or they were living on the streets, and they had to learn at a young age. Now most people, or most young men nowadays, don't have that adversity. They live in nice houses, their parents provide pretty much everything they need, they have food on their table every day, it's a good education. So give yourself the adversity, do the hard thing. And it doesn't have to be, it can be different for everybody, but for me personally, I take cold showers every day. I know that there's a lot of health benefits, but it also sucks. So I started to, kind of like warm myself up to it, take a hot shower, and then slowly do it cold. And now I just jump in cold, and it sucks. But if you do that first thing in the morning, that'll be the hardest thing you've done that day, and everything else seems easier. And then let alone all the health benefits that come from that. If, I would just say give yourself adversity. If it's waking up early in the morning, earlier than normal, then do that. If it's spending an extra hour working out, then do that. If it's reading that book that's been sitting there, do it. Force yourself to do it. Motivation is going to be fleeting. You need to, if you consistently do the hard thing, it's going to become a habit. And then when something hard comes up in life that you haven't planned for, you're going to be ready for it, whether it's, you know, mentally ready, physically ready, because you put in the work. And that's why most people fail, is they're not prepared for that, and they just don't know how to handle it. So if you can put it onto yourself, basically like working out your mind of, I'm going to do this even though my mind says no, it's screaming at me to stop. I'm going to keep doing this, so that if I'm in the business world and I get fired, I'm not going to break down, because I know I'm mentally tough and I'm going to keep going.
Any recommendations to young men, especially, or people in the audience, for how to find themselves, I suppose, how to find a level of purpose in their lives?
Well, like I said, going back to a couple of things I said, is have a plan. And if you're not sure what you want to do, start with what you don't want to do, because a lot of people know what they don't want to do. So that can help narrow down your list. And especially, I say, especially for young people, just go out and try things. Don't worry about failure. Don't worry about what other people think about you. That's a huge thing. Stop comparing yourself to other people. Don't look at other people's successes or failures, because everybody's different. So if you're, you know, in your teens and young 20s, that is the time to fail. You have a lifetime to go out and make money. You have a lifetime to accomplish a lot of things. So just go out and try it. And there's been a lot of things in my life that I didn't think I would like. Wrestling was the first one. When they approached me, I was like, I don't want to wrestle. Why would I want to do that? And then I showed up. I'm like, oh, this is amazing. So had I never just tried it the one day, I would have never had that experience, never gotten the joy out of doing that. So plan out your life the best you can. Try to remove your ego. Don't compare yourself to others. And be completely honest with yourself. A lot of people will lie to themselves, and just to make themselves feel better, or they'll make themselves look better than they actually are. Just remove your ego. Say, yep, I sucked at that. I was the worst one, on the team at that, whatever it may be. But I'm gonna either continue trying to get better, or I'm gonna shift and do something else.
If you had the opportunity to, right? If you were given the option, would you do it all again?
Absolutely. I think your mindset changes a lot, but I wouldn't be the person I am today had I not gone through all of that. And the experiences that I learned are invaluable. Just learning the hardest life lessons. I would have done things differently, but I would have done it all over again. But knowing what I know now, I probably would have been more intentional. I think at the beginning, I just had a dream of being a SEAL. And once I became one, it was kind of like, okay, I'll just be a SEAL. If I go back, I would have been a lot more intentional about, okay, what do I want to get out of this? And that's what I do now every day when I do something. What's the point of this? I want to be intentional about everything, whether it's what I'm eating, how I'm spending my time, how I'm sleeping. I want there to be a purpose and a meaning for everything. And I think once you can get to that point where you start to be extremely intentional about everything in your life, everything starts to make sense and go a lot smoother.
Would you say that having a routine helps at all? Like, what does your routine look like?
I'd say routine helps a lot, and I mean, you can go into the science of it, but having a routine but some flexibility. So getting a proper amount of sleep is important to me. So when I wake up, I drink a glass of water, take the cold shower, and then prepare for my day. So a lot of times I like to prepare for my day the night before of what I'm going to do. Um, Going back to just being intentional, I don't, and it, you can be intentional and do nothing. You can say, I've worked out every day this week, or I'm not feeling well, or whatever it may be, and I'm being intentional to take a day off. But I want that to be planned in my life. So having that routine of, okay, night before, what's my plan for the next day? How am I going to tackle this? What foods am I going to eat? Because I think food is super important. How am I going to, if I have something coming up, how am I going to prepare for this? If I have, this podcast, what do I want to talk about? How am I going to approach this to get what I want in life? Because at the end of the day, this is my life. And if you don't have a routine and plan in place, chances are that someone else is going to give you one, whether it's your parents or friends, and they don't have your best interest in mind as far as what's best for you. So yeah, I think it's super helpful.
Are there any workouts that you have during the day that you especially go to, because you have spoken about working out before? So
Yeah, I don't have a specific routine. I've done part of that is I've done a lot of studying on what works for me, a lot of trial and error. But I like to do compound movements, so squats, deadlifts, stuff like that. I think it's good for the structure of the body, but also maintaining that with. I like to run, calisthenics, a lot of stretching. I do, like I said, like the ice bath or the cold shower, sauna, um, all these things that I think are helpful. And I think it can be difficult for guys starting, or anybody in general, starting off at first because they don't know. That's why I say just go out and try and fail as many times, because I feel like now I'm so in tune with my body. I don't really need to have a specific routine. I can kind of wake up and feel what I'm feeling and understand, okay, today's a running day. I don't need to plan it the night before, but I just know intuitively, based on years and years of trial and error, today's a running day, or today's a stretching day, or today, I need to really bust my ass and push my body because I haven't been doing that in a while, and I need to break past that mental barrier.
so now we're at the two last questions I'm going to ask you, and then we'll talk a little bit after the show. So, what would you like to say to any future or current leaders, politicians that you'd like about anything that you would like to see in terms of changes in the government and society, especially with regards to military veterans and personnel? Doesn't have to be, but if you prefer to.
Yeah, I'll speak more specifically about military and veterans. I try to stay out of politics as much as I can, but I think there are changes being made, but I think a huge thing is taking care of veterans or just military in general. I mean, there's the sad stat right now of 22 veterans a day are committing suicide, and to me, that's not acceptable. I mean, you have these guys that go out and risk their lives for this country, or sacrifice time, sacrifice their marriages, whatever it may be for this country, and they're not getting the full support. when they come home, and that's why a lot of them are taking their own lives. And I've had personal friends that happen to, so it's important to me. I think there are being changes made, that they're going in the right step. But I think when it comes to like the grand scheme, a lot of politicians or leaders kind of look at the military as just like a big war machine, rather than a bunch of individual lives that have their own wants and needs, and have their own emotions and feelings and their own families. So just understanding that, yes, the military is there to protect our freedoms, or there to enhance the country, whatever they need, but also understand it's made up a bunch of individuals.
Is there anything you would like to say to the audience? Anybody in the audience? What message would you want people to hear?
I'm a firm believer in that you create your own reality, and that what you think manifests into your life. I think it's going back to the intentional thing of how you speak to yourself, how you speak to others, what you put into your body. I think it's all incredibly important, and I think the more people can take care of their own lives and clean up. There's a saying, it's like, if you want to go change the world, clean your bedroom first. And there's a lot of people that aren't cleaning their bedroom, and they're going out and trying to do these big things. So what I'd like to say is, clean up your room, like take care of your own life, be honest with yourself. And once you figure that out, then you can go out and start to make an impact in the world.
All right. I'll talk to you a little bit after the show. I'm going to stop recording now. All right.
Sounds good.
All right.